you tell me a bit about your work and the poster you're presenting today?
Yes, of course. Yeah, my topic was to develop an Imprint crawler for Imprint documents of website, following the German legislation when it comes to the information that needs to be inside of the Imprint. It's a specific law in Germany that if you have a website or something similar, a Telemedia Angebot is called, that you have to bring and mention specific information. And it's divided into two parts, and the first thing is where it has to be placed on the website, and the second part is the content of the information, which gives a lot of insight about the provider, and also if the provider is can be taken serious or maybe doesn't have that much integrity. So that's to the background. For example, you can find the address of the person that's providing the website, and so on. And the way it is set to, the way you know what you have to provide when it comes to information inside of the website, in the Imprint document, it is divided into commercial versus non-commercial use, or it is divided into editorial and non-editorial content, if it's there. And by that, you have to give specific kinds of information. It can be more specific or less specific. For example, if you are working in a firm and you're in the process of liquidation, there is the intent to give information where you're standing right now in the process, and so that has to be provided. So what I decided to do, since there is a list of information that needs to be taken out of the website, I tried to implement a crawler that takes use of the structural information that is part of the HTML code of a website, and construct rules based on construct rules around that information. There's different knowledge that comes to mind that can be used to analyze and find the different information that's inside of the Imprint. For example, there's the structural information that's together is encapsulated by a tag, or maybe a headline tag or something like this. But there's also information that is typically for a specific kind of information that is when it comes to content. For example, when you have a street name, there is in Germany like a Straße or Weg as an indicator that we are talking about a street. But on the other hand, there is the information is generally structured. For example, there could be, the postcode in Germany has 5 digits. So you can search for 5 digits in the text, and then you have an indicator, okay, this place I found has a high probability of being a postcode with some additional search. And so on that basis, I try to formulate rules that connect the information with each other. Like you can see here, X, and then I arrow to Y, to Y. And it can be seen as an implication. When you observe X, you can conclude Y. And this way, from the overall finding of domain knowledge and content-specific information, and partly web scraping of information that is available to a specific field of the Imprint, the rules got implemented into code. So in the end, I was writing the one rule and translated them after I formulated them into the code, and I tried to get the results and see if this approach was overall feasible and if it could be used in a broader spectrum. And like you can see here 2 examples. The first one is for the Umsatzsteueridentifikationsnummer, which is a specific number that you have to give information about in the Imprint if you are a firm. And it's quite easy because it's just a regular expression you have to search for. And you can see here, it's just a white space at the beginning of a tag, and then just two alphabetical, A to Z. And then there is either a white space or up to 9 digits, or they have to be 9 digits. And with this expression, you can relatively easily find all numbers that fulfill that structure. And also, this kind of structure doesn't come up very often in a different way. For example, there isn't such combination inside of a document that isn't, if it's found, an Umsatzsteueridentifikationsnummer. Another example would be the different chambers we have professions in Germany that are that have to be part of a specific chamber that's specific for the job profession. And for this, at the first time, there was a web scraper written that collected all chambers that existed to that specific job profession. And then the HTML source code was analyzed, and then there was an algorithm provided that checked, okay, we found with another regular expression a word where a chamber was mentioned, and then we will take a look, okay, does this chamber match the list that we created? And when it found a match, it's looking forward, backward, and in both directions, depending on the specific name. And when a match is found, it can be said, okay, yeah, at this place in the imprint we found a chamber, and it may be relevant it is relevant for the whole context of the imprint. Yeah. So altogether, the imprint document is quite a broad and complex document because you have like 10 fields, and every field can be divided into different subfields. So the problem in general is quite broad and not so easy to solve. But even though with a small set of rules, we could reach good performance when it comes to different fields of the imprint. So some fields had really good performance and some weren't that good. But overall, you could say that the more structural an information is, the easier you can extract it, and the more information you have about the information itself, the easier it also is to generate rules. So the overall approach of defining the rules, translating them into code, seems to work. But the big question is if the reason it's not working perfectly is if we don't have enough rules, or if the overall approach doesn't come to a reasonable result. Because if a field is occurring very differently between imprint to imprint, you need more rules to define so you can get more results and find every field in the different documents. And yeah, that's the question that's still out there and that needs improving. But overall, we can say that we have good results to the Umsatzsteueridentifikationsnummer, the contact information, the address of the firm, the chambers when it comes to a chamber job profession, or if there are editorial indicators given on the website. What isn't working that well is the editor info, the legal form of the firm that is providing the website, which comes mostly due to the fact that the shortings like GmbH or KÜR are quite short, and they they are often inside of a imprint document, but not in the way that you can identify them easily as a legal form for the firm. And yeah, another thing that also was quite difficult was a representative, because there were names to be taken into account. For example, we scraped a list of 10,000 names, and then we checked the words against each other, but it wasn't working to a level that we could be happy with it, because again, some names are just really weird and partly normal words, and so there can happen a mix-up. But yeah, it could be said that with improving and some more rules, these problems will decrease.
Excellent, thank you. Just one additional question. If I have now extracted the imprint data, what are typical application areas for using that data? They come different to mind. You could, in the end, make a general guess about the quality of an imprint, if it's a valid imprint, but as the state of now, that's not right now possible. But you can also just take parts of the imprint that you want to analyze. So you don't have to analyze the imprint altogether, but you can just focus on one bit of information. And for example, when it comes to an address, in a set of websites, you can take every address into account, and then you can compare the addresses. And for example, you could see if different websites have the same address, which could mean that they are connected in a way that's not easily visible when you just look at the websites themselves. Okay, great, thank you.